Have you ever been to a sporting event where it seems like there's one athlete on the field of play that absolutely seems to be everywhere? Maybe it's a linebacker at a football game, and every time you turn around, he's either making a tackle that makes a difference in the game, or knocking down a pass, or sacking the quarterback, or maybe even intercepting a pass. And the announcers will say, if you watch, that guy is everywhere. Or maybe it's a basketball player who you know from the time he or she steps onto the court that they have something special about them. And as the game unfolds, you see it happening. You see that they dive for all the loose balls. They seem to be just in the right place at the right time to get that scrappy rebound, or to tip the ball back in and get a score exactly when the team needs it. I know what it is to use that phrase, and that girl is everywhere, because I worked in radio for a couple years and did play-by-play. And I watched those kinds of players where every time you turned around, they were there. They were Johnny on the spot. They were players who had quickness. They were quick, they were fast, they had good sense of the game. And so we announcers would say things like, and they're everywhere, they're all over the place. And obviously that was the use of exaggeration. That was hyperbole. We were trying to make a point that this person is agile, is quick, is in the right place at the right time. That's the concept of being omnipresent. I don't know if you've ever heard this word before. It's not a word that we kick around too often. I read a funny thing as I was reading an article about this. A guy said, it sounds like something that they would say in Star Trek. Captain Kirk, this is Spock. We have omnipresent on the screen. I mean, it's not something that you think about very often. What does it mean? Interestingly enough, it's a word that we use to describe God, and yet if you turn through your Bibles, you'll not find the word. You can go get into my office, you can get a concordance, you can look it up on your computer. You won't find the word omnipresent or omnipresence in your text at all, and yet you will find in this book, and in the book that I hope you're holding in your hands, you will find the God who defines that word. Over the next 3 weeks, I want us to grapple with this question: so what about God? Now, you may have seen that title, and I'll guarantee you that you read it probably like this: so what about God? Like that. But if you did that, you would be putting the emphasis on the wrong syllable. That's not how I want you to read it. Don't read it, so what about God? Read it like this: so what about God? Now that's something we have to grapple with. That's something we've got to wrestle with and answer. In fact, I don't think that there's a more important question in your life to answer than so what about God? Especially if you're investigating the Christian faith. Especially if you're just working through some things in your life and you're thinking, you know, I hear Randy on occasion, maybe I hear him every week, maybe I watch him on television, and I hear him talking about discipleship and God and following Christ, and I just don't know about all that. That's okay. That's okay. That's an okay place to be if you're investigating. And the question you need to answer, pursue the rest of your life answering, is, so what about God? Where is He? Who is He? What does He do? You'll spend a lifetime answering those questions. And the closer you get to God, the clearer the answer becomes. As I said, if you'll flip through your Bible, you won't find the word omnipresent, but you will find the God who defines what that means. Let me give you an example. David knew full well the concept of the omnipresence of God. If you read all of Psalm 139, you'll see it, but we're going to take just a piece here from the Message. Is there any place I can go to avoid your spirit, David asks, to be out of your sight? If I climb to the sky, you're there. If I go underground, you're there. If I flew on the morning's wings to the far western horizon, you'd find me in a minute. You're already there waiting. David understood what it meant for God to be omnipresent. I also like what Jeremiah says in chapter 23 and verse 24. God Himself is saying, can anyone hide out in a corner where I can't see him? This is God's decree. Am I not present everywhere, whether seen or unseen? And the NIV puts it this way: do I not fill the heavens and the earth? In other words, there is no place that I'm not, God says. And so my question for us this morning in part is this: so is God like the sports announcer like I was? Is God just using exaggeration to make a point? Is God using hyperbole to say, well, you know, I want you to know that I'm really concerned about everyone everywhere, but really I'm not everywhere at the same time? That's something to grapple with. You see, omnipresent is two words broken down. Omni means all, and present means locality. That's all it means. So you know what that means? It means God is local all the time. All the time. God is always available. He's always there. Let's put it this way. God's complete presence, God's complete essence, that is present at all times and in all places. That's not hyperbole. That's not exaggeration. That is the biblical truth of God. He is everywhere, all the time, in all places. In our vernacular, that's how we say it. Just like the song we just listened to, the great song by Third Day. Very simple lyrics. Nothing profound about their lyrics except that they're right on. Here's a guy writing this song, looks around and says, like the rain that falls, like the wind that blows, even though I don't even know how all this happens, that's just like you, God. You're everywhere. You fill up the heavens and the earth. God is everywhere. But I got news for you. For those of us who grasp that, and even maybe those who are still investigating and searching that out, they hear me say that, I'll tell you one thing that all of us experience when we think about that on any level other than just the surface, and that is, that makes us uncomfortable. God is everywhere. That concept makes us uncomfortable. You mean God saw that? You mean God was in on that transaction? You mean God saw what went on behind my closed, locked doors? You mean God saw that? It makes us uncomfortable. So here's what we do, being the industrious and ingenious humans that we are. Here's what we do when that makes us uncomfortable. We devise systems to confine God. We like to make God small so that we can control Him. See, God being everywhere and seeing everything and being no matter where we go, David says, if I go up to the heavens, you're there. If I go down to the depths, you're there. If I go to east, west, north, south, wherever I go, you're there waiting on me. That concept makes us very uncomfortable because it means that God does see and is there for everything that we do. And so it's much easier, don't you think, as humans just to make God small. Let's make Him small. It's like when you fly. Anybody ever flown first class on an airplane? I have one time. It's because I got bumped. I've never chosen to fly first class. It costs too much. But for some reason, when I was about 12, my sister and I were flying from Grand Junction, Colorado, back to her home in Sacramento, California. And they, for some reason, they bumped us. They walked up and said, we're having some, seating problems. Would you like to move to first class? Excuse me, they said business class, but it was first class. We're like, okay. I mean, we didn't know. I sure didn't know, and she didn't fly enough to know. So we go up, man, you can't believe what it's like in business class. I'm talking about John and I flew to the Ukraine. I had John on one side and the guy that made John look like Tiny on the other side. And I'm like this for 12 hours. You go to business class, man, you can stretch out. The thing lays back. They come by and give you all kinds of stuff. They came by and gave us this little leather kit that had like a toothbrush in it and a hair comb and a breath mint, all this other stuff. We're like, cool. I want to fly first class more often. That's like what we want to do with God sometimes. We want Him to be in this little kit that's all nice and neat and in a package because the fact that He's so big and He is everywhere frustrates us and scares us. Let me share with you some popular concepts in the world. You may not recognize this one, but believe you me, if you ever travel internationally, this concept of God is more widespread than you ever thought it would be in America, and that is pantheism. And pantheism is nothing more than saying God is in everything. Now hear me out. Notice I did not say God created everything. That's true. Notice that I did not say God's design can be seen in everything. God's fingerprint can be seen on everything in creation. Those are all true. That's not what pantheism says. True pantheism says this: God is in everything. God's in the grass. God's in the trees. God's in the flowers. God's in the stars. God's in the sky in terms of the creationary aspect of it. Let me give you another example. It's sort of like Hinduism. You know why they don't eat cows in India? You've heard the concept sacred cow. We throw that around as a metaphor. That's because it comes from a literal belief. Why don't they eat cows? because cows are gods to be worshipped. God is in cows, and God's in beetles, and God's in... That's an offshoot of Hinduism. God is in everything. You see, that makes that... So, here's the reality behind that. So, I'm also part of God, and therefore, because I'm part of God, then really, since He made me this way, and I'm part of Him, then there's really no way that I can sin. I can never be apart from Him, and so therefore I don't really need a Savior. Now you may be going, huh? Believe you me, this is more widespread in the world as a whole than you might believe. God is in everything, and I don't really need that Savior stuff. Here's another one that maybe is a little closer to home. Deism. Deism says this, yeah, God created the world and everything we know, and He spun it like a top into action. Pew! There goes the earth. And then He walked away. And He left us to our own devices. Yeah, God created everything, but He got everything going, but He's off now someplace else. And here's the practical implication of that. You may not think, well, I'm not a deist. But if you've ever thought this, God is so far off that He doesn't really know me, He doesn't care. Why should I pray, God protect me as I drive from here to the grocery store? Because God doesn't care about the little things in my life. He's so big, He's so far off and so far away. If you've ever thought like that, then those are deistic tendencies. That yes, you see God is powerful and God can do all this stuff, but that power is not available to me. I can't get up close and personal with God. That's deism, at least a form of it. Probably most of us wouldn't fall into the category of pantheists or deists, but I'll guarantee you, one way or another, we've all fallen into this box, and that is the box of religion. Let me say that again. Most of us have, and hopefully in the future will not fall into putting, or rather be the kinds of people who put God into the box of religion. In my opinion, this is by far the number one way in which we make God small. Well, we've basically got God figured out. We have gone to the Scriptures, us and our group, denomination, synod, we've gone to the Scriptures and we've figured out everything that God wants of us, and here they are, and here we're going to do them now. And we make a practice of doing them on a regular basis. That's putting God in a box, people. Well, you see, we've got the right version of the Bible. We sing the right songs. And by the way, if we have a book that has some wrong songs in it, we'll go through there and we'll stamp "do not sing" on them. Do not sing, do not sing, do not sing. Because you have to sing the right songs, and if they were written 10 or 50 or 100 years ago by people whose hearts were drawn to God with these lyrics, but now they don't really apply. Maybe they were a little off on their theology. 100 years removed, it's easy for us to see that, we think. So we're going to sing all the right songs, and if they're wrong, then we'll just stamp them out. That's putting God in a box. Well, you see, we have all the right doctrines. We have the right name on the building. Our denomination is the right one. Let me tell you something, folks. That's called religion. And that puts God in a box. That tries to make God small. Some people don't like the concept that God likes other people in other churches. God is big. He fills the heavens and the earth, and He can do whatever He likes. And His eyes go to and fro throughout the earth, looking for those whose hearts are fully devoted to Him. Not just what's on the door, not just what song book you use. Putting God in the box of my rightness. Do you see the problem here? The problem is we humans, created people, part of God's creation, think that we can have someone as big as God all figured out. That's a significantly arrogant place to be. And that puts God in a box. Yes, it is sinful. That puts God in a box. You know what, guys? Religion is how people can go to church and sit in a pew and play the religion game and then leave and play whatever they want. I've seen it my whole life. I've done it for much of my life. That's how people can sing, come together and sing about the love of Christ and then leave and treat people like garbage, watch garbage, and listen to garbage. Because they got God in a box. Let's put God in a box over here in our church building, and we'll go to the church building and we'll visit God. But when I leave, just leave me alone. I've actually had a person almost come years ago wanting to get in a fist fight because we wanted to play a song in a Bible class at that time in a denomination that I was a part of, didn't believe in having instruments in church. We wanted to play a song as part of a class, and he was ready to go to fisticuffs because we wanted to play this song, and yet out in his truck he's listening to AC/DC, Highway to Hell. Now tell me how that fits. How can you make sense of that? How can pastors and church leaders go to these conferences and try to get filled up with God and pay for prostitutes on Friday night? Because they're separating their spirituality from the other part of their life. And I got news for you. God is bigger than that. And God is there to see it. He's with us all the time. You can't make God manageable and safe. We talk about providence. Well, that was the providence of God. When something goes on that we can't explain behind the scenes and it all works out, and that's just providence. This morning, Carol didn't know what I was preaching on. She didn't have a clue, and she sends what she thinks the songs, here's a list of songs we can sing today. She sort of gives an idea of what our praise and worship is going to be like. The very first slideshow, of all the slideshows we have, and we have about 40, the very first thing on the thing was You're Everywhere, the one we just watched. She had no idea what I was preaching on. I go, that's the providence of God. You know what we're doing when we say that? We're trying to make God safe. Well, God, I don't know what you're doing, and I can't explain it, so I'm going to throw providence out there to make myself feel like that you're not so huge and unmanageable that I don't know what to do with you. God's bigger than that. And He's everywhere. The Bible teaches that God is omnipresent. He's always local. He's everywhere all the time. And so now I'm back to the original question. I'm back to the title of this 3-lesson series. So what about God? So what that He's omnipresent? How does that help me tomorrow in my job? How does that help me in my marriage? How does that help me in my relationship with my brothers and sisters, and even more than that, with people who don't yet know Christ? How does that help? So what that God is omnipresent? You see, I don't want to go through the text proving to you, which I could over and over and over and over again, that God is everywhere all the time, because I don't want you to go, oh, that's good, I've got this long database, of knowledge now that God's omnipresent, and walk out and not be changed. Because this church is about the so what in life. If I can't help you find the so what, I need to do something else. And we as a church need to do something else, because people are asking every day, so what? Here is the so what. Let's start here. Everybody remembers Moses, right? You remember not Charlton Heston. The real Moses. Charlton Heston, he just plays one on TV. Remember back. The great lawgiver, the great leader of Israel. Yes, he started out as a stuttering stammerer, and he didn't really want to go, but when he finally got there, some pretty awesome stuff. I mean, the Red Sea splitter, and the turning the Nile to water to blood guy, and all the plagues. And we remember all those powerful things that Moses did. Here was a kid, here was a Hebrew baby floating down the river, and is picked up by Egyptian royalty. And a Hebrew baby is being raised to be the Prince of Egypt, the next prince. That's the story. Now we remember that part of it, and we jump ahead to like 80 years, and remember the part where he comes back and all the miracles happen. But I want you to find a spot in between here. Moses walks outside one day. Here is the next prince of Egypt. He's being groomed to lead this nation. And he walks outside, and he sees an Egyptian taskmaster pile driving a Hebrew. Now for those of you who don't watch the World Wrestling Federation, pile driver is a wrestling term. In other words, he's putting a hurt on him. And Moses got angry. And here's what the text says in Exodus chapter 2. Time passed. This is after Moses becomes a man now. Time passed. Moses grew up. One day he went out and saw his brothers, that would be the Hebrews, and saw all that hard labor. Then he saw an Egyptian hit a Hebrew, one of his relatives. He looked this way and that. And when he realized there was no one in sight, he killed. Parenthetical statement here, this is Moses. This is the big dude. This is the lawgiver. This is the guy who visited with God face to face. This is the guy who split the Red Sea. This is the guy who built the tabernacle with the cloud of fire by night and the pillar of cloud by day. This is that Moses. He killed the Egyptian and buried him in the sand. And then he fled. He got out of Dodge. Here's the so what of God's omnipresence. The so what, we start here, is something that Moses forgot. Moses forgot that God is an eyewitness to every single event in our lives. God is an eyewitness to every single event in our lives. You know what? The coast is never clear in God's economy. You can't say, the coast is clear, He's not around, maybe He won't see this. There are no locked doors. There are no closed rooms. There are no hidden agendas. There are no innuendos. Everything is open to the eyes of God, even if we think we're doing it in secret. Now everybody here is going, yeah, that's right. Let me give you an illustration. Remember when our kids were really little, big enough to walk and talk some, but not, still in the toddler age. And they like to play hide and seek. Now maybe your kids didn't do that. My kids did this. They say, Dad, let's play hide and seek. Okay, let's play hide and seek. So they would go over somewhere and they wouldn't really hide. It was like, this is like a door or something. And they go over and they get behind it and they go like this. Okay, find me. You know what's funny about that, and we laugh, is they foolishly think that because they can't see us, we can't see them. Okay, find me, I'm hiding. And they may be out in plain sight. Funny thing, we do the same thing with God. We do the same thing with God. Well, I can't see God, so I'm going to talk to my spouse any old way I please. It's my house. I'm the man of the house. This is my bedroom. I'll say what I dadgum want to say to her. And no one's going to see it. Well, I'll just take a few things from the stock room. Nobody's really going to see. Just a few stamps from the company. Company won't mind. I used to be a waiter. I'm just going to graze a few of these French fries. They don't really need an extra large order anyway. No one's going to see. I'll just spend some time on this internet site. Just me behind this closed door, and nobody will see. The fact is, God sees because He's there. Now, I want you to understand something before we move on. God is a loving overseer. Don't picture God as the pilot in a police chopper flying over your life, and he's got M50s off the side. So every time you break the law, he's shooting you down. And that's how many people view God. God is the sheriff in town. God is in this police chopper flying, just hovering over your life wherever you go. And He's watching for you to every little misstep, every little law you break. That's not the way God is. God is with us. He is presently local wherever we go because He can't stand the thought of being away from us. Just like we feel about our children. I hope that you're not the kind of parent who constantly hovers over your child waiting for them to make mistakes. I just like to be with my kids. I want to look out for them. I want to help them. I want them to eat right, yes. And so I'm going to give them direction on how to do that. I'm not going to turn them loose with their bicycles in the middle of Highway 43. Yes, I'm going to oversee them because I love them and I can't stand not being with them, either just separated by distance or separated by death. I can't stand that thought. And so I oversee them with love. If I really believe and grasp the fact that God is everywhere, then that surely should motivate me, should motivate us to be accountable to God. I'm thinking back, I was just sitting there this morning thinking back about 13 years ago, when just because my life was so messed up and I was trying to find God and seek God and didn't know how to do that and was trying to just trying to vomit away all these years of religion and didn't know what to do. So I went to the preacher. At that time, I didn't know him that well. Now he's my dear friend Foy. I said, I just need to get together with you. Okay, what do you want to talk about? I said, I don't know. I don't know. But I need to get together. So we started getting together on Tuesday nights. Then we moved to Tuesday morning. And then we moved it to Friday mornings. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, within 6 months, there were about 13 guys between the ages of 25 and 45 that were meeting on Friday mornings. And guess what happened in that group? We became an accountability group. I'd never been part of anything like that before. You know what that means? That means we got together, we loved each other, we prayed for each other, and we held each other's feet to the fire. And I'm talking about there were sexual sins confessed there, there were marriage sins confessed there, there were all kinds of sins confessed there, and because of that group, God used that accountability group and the love that was shared between guys who were at different places in their life to save marriages, didn't it, Kelly? Marriages that were on the road to destruction got saved because of that accountability group. Because one person would stand up and say, you know, guys, I'm probably the only one here who struggled with this, and let me tell you, this is really hard for me to tell you, but this is my sin. Blah! And just spewed it right there on the table. And you could just see other guys in the room just go, oh. They went, somebody else besides me struggles. And we look forward to that. We met, now listen to this, we didn't even have to. We met at 5:45, 6 o'clock in the morning, every Friday morning for almost 2 hours. We didn't get any brownie points in heaven. There wasn't anybody checking us off at the front door. We met there because we couldn't do without it. And all of our wives started going, what is going on up there? You know, kind of like the Acts 2 thing. These guys are drunk on wine. What are they? They're coming home. They're being better husbands. They're communicating. They're showing some love. What are you guys doing up there? Well, y'all smoking something? What's going on? They couldn't believe it. You know what it was? It was getting together and holding each other accountable. So I knew if I showed up, I knew that I was going to live that week, that whatever I did, if I did something outside the will of God, I was going to have to look those guys in the face and either come clean or lie through my teeth, and they could tell when I was lying. I tried that about once. That's the implication of God being everywhere, is that He lovingly oversees and holds us accountable. But God's more than that. He's more than a loving overseer. He's also a comforting caregiver in the tough times. All of us have been there. All of us have been. You ever had your spirit crushed? Ever had your heart broken? Ever had, you know, where you're going like this with the Neosporin because the knife wound in your back is still healing? I've been there. You've been there. Some of you are still there. Listen what the psalmist says in that regard. God keeps an eye on His friends. His ears pick up every moan and groan. God won't put up with rebels. He'll cull them from the pack. Is anyone crying for help? God's listening, ready to rescue you. If your heart is broken, you'll find God right there. If you're kicked in the gut, He'll help you catch your breath. Disciples so often get into trouble. Still, God is there every time. He's your bodyguard, shielding every bone. Not even a finger gets broken. What happens when your spirit gets crushed? And it will, if it hasn't already. What do you do when your heart's broken? Where do you turn? Anger, bitterness, resentment? I've been there. Still there to some degree. You just struggle all the time with your pain. You see, what I want you to see is God's omnipresence, God being everywhere. It's not just about the detective aspect. There is a detective aspect to God's omnipresence, always looking, but there's also a protective aspect to God's omnipresence. I personally don't know how anyone can function outside of the fact that God's presence is in their lives. I don't know how you can function like that without going crazy. Well, I did function that way. Tried to for a long time. And what happens is, life and all of its problems, you become a Christian, your problems don't go away. In fact, sometimes they seem like they multiply. But when you're in a place where you can't see the omnipresence of God, you can't, for whatever reason, you can't get past the fact that God is there, it seems like all your problems encircle you. You see all the problems, you see all the pain, you see all the struggle, but you don't see any help. Kind of like the story about Elisha. And if you don't know much about Elisha, he was a prophet in the Old Testament. Came after Elijah, if you've heard of him. And he had a servant. And at this time there was war going on in Israel with a nation called the Arameans. And to make a long story short, Elisha and his servant go to sleep in this cave, and the servant wakes up and he goes outside the cave and looks, and there are chariots and there are soldiers, I don't know, hundreds of them surrounding them, and the guy's knees begin to knock together. Oh no. You see, he can see the enemy, but he can't see any help. Elisha wakes up. What's the problem? Look, the enemy's, we're gonna get slaughtered. And Elijah says, don't be afraid. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed, O Lord, open his eyes so he may see. Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked, and he saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. Those that are with us are more than those that are with them. But he couldn't see it. Even though they were there, he couldn't see it. And you know what? I want those eyes, don't you? Don't you want those eyes sometimes when all the problems of life encircle us and say, God, I see the enemy, but I don't see any help on the horizon. I want those eyes. Let me tell you something. That's what this series of sermons is about. That's what my ministry is about. That's what Christianity is about. Calling you to see through the eyes of faith that God is everywhere, there beside you to fight your battles, not only with you, but many times for you. How did David put it? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in the green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the path of righteousness for His name's sake. Yes, even though, what is He doing? Even though I walk, where? Through the valley of the shadow of death, I won't fear evil. Why is that? Because you're with me. You know, we like statistics. 1 out of 8 people will get cancer or whatever. And 1 out of 4 people will be involved in a car accident. Let me throw a real staggering statistic at you. 1 out of 1 people will die. 1 out of 1 will die. So guys, if you haven't walked through this valley of the shadow of death on your own, you probably have walked hand in hand with a spouse, a friend, a parent, a child, a friend, an aunt, an uncle. We have walked through the valley of the shadow of death because everyone will die. 1 out of 1 will die. And David says, but I don't have any fear. Why? Why? Because he knew God's omnipresence. Because you are with me. He didn't see him standing there, but he knew he was there anyway. God's everywhere-ness benefits me because He's a comforting caregiver. But last of all, this is for me. This is me personally. Maybe not for you. The greatest benefit for me of God's everywhere-ness is that He is a constant companion. I referred to earlier the fact that I've traveled internationally on 2 occasions. John, much more than that. But I'm thinking about the last time that we went. You know, there's something that's absolutely indispensable when you travel internationally, and that is a good translator. You have got to have a translator in a country where you don't know the culture, you don't know the language. You've got to. You know why? Because people will take advantage of you. They'll tell you something costs $100 when it costs $1, and you won't know any different. The exchange rate's different. And, you know, I give you a million examples, but when we went, these 2 ladies, Marina for John and Olga for me, were absolutely indispensable. They went everywhere with us. They knew the language. They weren't going to let anybody take advantage of us. We trusted them implicitly. They stood beside us on every single thing that we encountered. If I hadn't had another young lady with me who just recently got married, Christy, we were on a subway, I probably would have gotten my tail whipped. In fact, I might not even be here today. Because that was the time of the Serbian conflict. Remember that whole thing, Kosovo and all that? And I got on the thing, and this guy was drunk, and older guy, big guy, speaking broken English and saying Americans and spitting, and I didn't have to know much to know he didn't like me. He said Americano, and he spit, and that was enough. Of course, I'm just standing there. I don't know what to do. It's crowded in this subway, you know, and you've got to keep your hands on your pockets so nobody pickpockets. And here's this guy standing this far from me, and just breathing alcohol, and I'm thinking, I'm in big trouble. And she grabs me by the arm. She says, we're getting off. And so the next stop, the door's open, and she waits till she knows exactly when. And then she literally pulls me off the subway to keep me from getting pounced. She's indispensable. You've got to have somebody that you can trust. Guess what? When Jesus went back to heaven, He sent back to every believer a life translator. Somebody who will be there with you all the time. Somebody who will not leave you no matter what. They will help you get through all the tough times in life because they're a constant companion, and you can trust them Without a doubt. You know what? I don't want to ever hear another Christian say this. Well, you know, I'm struggling in my faith, and my prayers don't make it past the ceiling. Guess what, guys? Jesus is not past the ceiling. He's right there on the bed beside you. So they don't have to go past the ceiling, because He's right there. I'm going to make a controversial statement that many people would disagree with. I believe it's absolutely true. If Jesus Christ, the same Jesus Christ that we worship today, were alive and well in the flesh, He is alive and well, but He lives in us by His Spirit because He's at the right hand of God interceding for us right now. But if He were here in flesh and blood, just like Ned is sitting here today, and lived today, and preached today, just like He did back then, but except in our current context, we would be the most miserable people in the world. You're going, whoa, time out. No way. Yes, why? You know why? Because when I need Jesus in Fayette, I don't want Him in Sulligent. When Jesus was in flesh and blood, He was restricted to time and space. He couldn't just go whoop and just beam me up, Scotty, and go someplace. He had to walk. He had to ride. And you know what? I want Him in Alabama right now. Texas can have Him later. As far as I'm concerned, New York can never have Him. And don't even talk about international. I don't want Him to go home to the Middle East where He's from. I want Him here and now. You see, we would be miserable people because Jesus could only be spread so thin. But by dying and being resurrected and going back to heaven, He sent His Spirit to live in the hearts of every person who puts their faith in Him. God is everywhere now through Jesus in the life of the believer. He gave up His life and He rose again so that we would not have to be without a companion. I will talk to the Father, Jesus says, and He'll provide you another friend so that you will always have someone with you. This friend is the Spirit of truth. The godless world can't take Him because it doesn't have eyes to see Him. Notice that in the message. Excellent translation. Doesn't know what to look for. But you know Him already because He has been staying with you and will be in you. Notice that it says the world doesn't have the eyes to see Him. What kind of eyes does it take to see Him? It takes the eyes of faith. And if that's a stretch, if that's just so difficult in and of itself, then look around and look at God's people. And you'll look into the face of God. God is everywhere. Let me say it again. God is everywhere. Now the question is, are we living like it?